Good morning, spiritual companions. We are reading the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, continuing the introduction on page 3, Boyhood. Gadadhar grew up into a healthy and restless boy, full of fun and sweet mischief. He was intelligent and precocious and endowed with a prodigious memory. On his father's lap, he learned by heart the names of his ancestors and the hymns to the gods and goddesses. And at the village school, he was taught to read and write. But his greatest delight was to listen to recitals of stories from Hindu mythology and the epics. These he would afterward recount from memory, to the great joy of the villagers. Painting he enjoyed. The art of molding images of the gods and goddesses he learnt from the potters. But arithmetic was his greatest aversion. At the age of 6 or 7, Gadadhar had his first experience of spiritual ecstasy. One day in June or July, when he was walking along a narrow path between paddy fields, eating the puffed rice that he carried in a basket, he looked up at the sky and saw a beautiful dark thundercloud. As it spread, rapidly enveloping the whole sky, a flight of snow-white cranes passed in front of it. The beauty of the contrast overwhelmed the boy. He fell to the ground, unconscious, and the puffed rice went in all directions. Some villagers found him and carried him home in their arms. Gadadhar said later that in that state he had experienced an indescribable joy. Gadadhar was 7 years old when his father died. This incident profoundly affected him. For the first time, the boy realized that life on earth was impermanent. Unobserved by others, he began to slip into the mango orchard or into one of the cremation grounds, and he spent hours absorbed in his own thoughts. He also became more helpful to his mother in the discharge of her household duties. He gave greater attention to reading and hearing the stories recorded in the Puranas, and he became interested in the wandering monks and pious pilgrims who would stop at Kamarpukur on their way to Puri. These holy men, the custodians of India's spiritual heritage, and the living witnesses of the ideal of renunciation of the world and all-absorbing love of God, entertained the little boy with stories from the Hindu epics, stories of saints and prophets, and also stories of their own adventures. He, on his part, fetched their water and fuel and served them in various ways. Meanwhile, he was observing their meditation and worship. At the age of 9, Gadadhar was invested with the sacred thread. This ceremony conferred upon him the privileges of his Brahmin lineage, including the worship of the family deity, Raghuvir, and imposed upon him the many strict disciplines of a Brahmin's life. During the ceremony of investiture, he shocked his relatives by accepting a meal cooked by his nurse, a Sudra woman. Her father would never have dreamt of doing such a thing, but in a playful mood, Gadadhar had once promised this woman he would eat her food, and now he fulfilled his plighted word. The woman had piety and religious sincerity, and these were more important to the boy than mere social conventions. Gadadhar was now permitted to worship Raghuvir. Thus began his first training in meditation. He devoted himself so wholeheartedly to the worship that the stone image very soon appeared to him as the living Lord of the universe. His tendency to lose himself in contemplation was first noticed at this time. Behind his boyish lightheartedness was seen a deepening of his spiritual nature. About this time, on the Shivaratri night, consecrated to the worship of Shiva, a dramatic performance was arranged. The principal actor who was to play the part of Shiva suddenly fell ill, and Gadadhar was persuaded to act in his place. While friends were dressing him for the role of Shiva, smearing his body with ashes, matting his locks, placing a trident in his hand, and a string of Rudraksha beads around his neck, the boy appeared to become absent-minded. He approached the stage with slow and measured step, supported by his friends. He looked the living image of Shiva. The audience loudly applauded what it took to be his skill as an actor, but it was soon discovered that he was really lost in meditation. His countenance was radiant, and tears flowed from his eyes. He was lost to the outer world. The effect of this scene on the audience was tremendous. The people felt blessed, as by a vision of Shiva himself. The performance had to be stopped, and the boy's mood lasted till the following morning. Gadadhar himself now organized a dramatic company with his young friends. The stage was set in the mango orchard. The themes were selected from the stories of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Gadadhar knew by heart almost all of the roles, having heard them from professional actors. His favorite theme was the Vrindavan episode of Krishna's life, depicting the exquisite love stories of Krishna and the milkmaids and cowherd boys. Gadadhar would play the parts of Radha or Krishna and would often lose himself in the character he was portraying. His natural feminine grace heightened the dramatic effect. The mango orchard would ring with the loud kirtan of the boys. Lost in song and merrymaking, Gadadhar became indifferent to the routine of school. In 1849, Ramkumar, the eldest brother, went to Calcutta to improve the financial condition of the family. Gadadhar was on the threshold of youth. He had become the pet of the women of the village. They loved to hear him talk, sing, or recite from the holy books. They enjoyed his knack of imitating voices. Their woman's instinct recognized the innate purity and guilelessness of this boy, of clear skin, beaming eyes, smiling face, and inexhaustible fun. The pious elderly women looked upon him as Gopala, the baby Krishna, and the younger ones saw in him the youthful Krishna of Vrindavan. He himself so idealized the love of the gopis for Krishna that he sometimes yearned to be born as a woman in order to be able to love Sri Krishna with all his heart. He would be born in a Brahmin family and become a widow soon after marriage. His sole occupation would be to meditate on Krishna, worship him, and cook for him, devoting spare moments to spinning. During the cow dust hour at sundown, so Sri Ramakrishna dreamt, the widow, with sweets made by her own hands, would await the arrival of her beloved. The very thought filled his mind with great joy. Coming to Calcutta. At the age of 16, Gadadhar was summoned to Calcutta by his elder brother Ramkumar, who wished assistance in his priestly duties. Ramkumar had opened a Sanskrit academy to supplement his income, and it was his intention gradually to turn his younger brother's mind to education. Gadadhar applied himself heart and soul to his new duty as family priest to a number of Calcutta families. His worship was very different from that of the professional priests. He spent hours decorating the images and singing hymns and devotional songs. He performed with love the other duties of his office. People were impressed with his ardor, but to his studies he paid scant attention. Ramkumar did not at first oppose the ways of his temperamental brother. He wanted Gadadhar to become used to the conditions of city life, but one day he decided to warn the boy about his indifference to the world. After all, in the near future, Gadadhar must, as a householder, earn his livelihood through performance of his Brahminical duties, and these required a thorough knowledge of Hindu law, astrology, and kindred subjects. He gently admonished Gadadhar and asked him to pay more attention to his studies. But the boy replied spiritedly, "Brother, what shall I do with a mere bread-winning education? I would rather acquire that wisdom which will illumine my heart and give me satisfaction forever." The anguish of the inner soul of India found expression through these passionate words of the young Gadadhar. For what did his unsophisticated eyes see around him in Calcutta, at that time the metropolis of India and the center of modern culture and learning? Greed and lust held sway in the higher levels of society, and the occasional religious practices were merely outer forms from which the soul had long ago departed. Gadadhar had never seen anything like this at Kamarpukur among the simple and pious villagers. The sadhus and wandering monks whom he had served in his boyhood had revealed to him an altogether different India. He had been impressed by their devotion and purity, their self-control and renunciation. He had learnt from them and from his own intuition that the ideal of life as taught by the ancient sages of India was the realization of God. Ramkumar could hardly understand the import of his young brother's reply. He described in bright colors the happy and easy life of scholars in Calcutta society. But Gadadhar intuitively felt that scholars, uninspired by knowledge of God, were, to use one of his own vivid illustrations, like so many vultures, soaring high on the wings of intellect, but with their eyes fixed on the charnel pit of greed and lust. So he stood firm, and Ramkumar had to give way. Kali Temple at Dakshineswar. At that time there lived in Calcutta a rich widow named Rani Rasmani, belonging to the Sudra caste, who was known far and wide not only for her business ability, courage, and intelligence, but also for her largesse of heart, piety, and devotion to God. She was assisted in the management of her vast property by her son-in-law, Mathuranath Biswas. In 1847, the Rani purchased 20 acres of land at Dakshineswar, a village about 4 miles north of Calcutta. Here she created a temple garden and constructed several temples. Her Ishta, or chosen ideal, was the Divine Mother Kali. The temple garden stands directly on the east bank of the Ganges. The northern section of the land and a portion to the east contain an orchard, flower gardens, and 2 small reservoirs. The southern section is paved with brick and mortar. The visitor, arriving by boat, ascends the steps of an imposing bathing ghat, which leads to the Chandni, a roofed terrace, on either side of which stand in a row 6 temples of Shiva. East of the terrace and the Shiva temples is a large court, paved rectangular in shape, and running north and south. 2 temples stand in the center of this court, the larger one to the south and facing south, being dedicated to Kali, and the smaller one facing the Ganges to Radhakanta, that is, Krishna, the consort of Radha. 9 domes with spires surmount the temple of Kali, and before it stands the spacious Nat Mandir, or music hall, the terrace of which is supported by stately pillars. At the northwest and southwest corners of the temple compound are 2 nahabats, or music towers, from which music flows at different times of the day, especially at sunup, noon, and sundown, when the worship is performed in the temples. 3 sides of the paved courtyard, all except the west, are lined with rooms set apart for kitchens, storerooms, dining rooms, and quarters for the temple staff and guests. The chamber in the northwest angle, just beyond the last of the Shiva temples, is of special interest to us, for here Sri Ramakrishna was to spend a considerable part of his life. To the west of this chamber is a semicircular porch overlooking the river. In front of the porch runs a footpath north and south, and beyond the path is a large garden, and below the garden, the Ganges. The orchard to the north of the buildings contains the Panchavati, the banyan, and the bell tree, associated with Sri Ramakrishna's spiritual practices. Outside and to the north of the temple compound proper is the kuthi, or bungalow, used by members of Rani Rasmani's family visiting the garden. And north of the temple garden, separated from it by a high wall, is a powder magazine belonging to the British government. End of section. End of today's reading.